All right, it's noon. So, to be mindful of everyone's time, I know you're all entrepreneurs that are incredibly busy. So, we are going to get started. Couple housekeeping items up front. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, you'll receive a copy of the recording immediately following the event with login details on how to access it. We are also going to be sharing a recap of this presentation on our blog, so keep an eye out for that. And there's going to be some links available in the chat when Andrea and Michael reference that. So I'm really looking forward to this event. We've got quite a few attendees already, and we had quite a few registrants. So I know we're going to get some great questions during the presentation. We are reserving about 15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. If you do have questions, ask them throughout. There is a Q&A button down at the bottom, or you can just chat them directly to me. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to my amazing colleagues, Andrea Ewing and Michael Kendrick Pratt, who we lovingly call MKP. So if you hear us referencing that, his name is Michael, but we go by MKP here. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and get off video so that you guys can just jump right into it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Heather. As Heather mentioned, I'm Michael Kendrick Pratt, and I'm joined by my colleague Andrea Ewing here today, and we're going to be talking about pitching during a pandemic, which Andrea and I are excited to share some tips and tricks around how to pitch investors during this time. We're really going to be focusing on a couple things, one of which is, how to get a meeting with an investor during the time of the pandemic, how to structure it, how to prepare for it, how to conduct the meeting. We're not going to be focusing so much on, what specific slides that you should have in your deck or what specific topics you need to cover during a pitch. But if you are interested in those types of things, we have some awesome resources at rev1ventures.com. If you go to our website, at the top of the website, we've got a handy link called the Entrepreneur's Toolkit. And if you go there and you pick the capital plan link, we've got a great blog post on how to set up an investor deck for a seed and early stage presentation. It literally brings you through every slide that you could potentially want in a deck and how to put that together. I see Heather just dropped the link into the chat here. And so if you're interested in that, Andrea and both very happy to walk through that deck and talk to folks after the presentation today, but please check that out. It's a great resource and has a lot of good options for you as you're building your own deck. We're going to go through the slide deck, and then, as Heather mentioned, going to have and save time for plenty of questions at the end. So please be active in the chat. Throw your questions in as we're going through, and we'll try to address as many of them as we can at the end. So my background, I've been here at Rev1 for, almost 6 years now. Been focused on a couple different areas. Right now, I manage our State Auto Labs Fund, which is the fund that Rev1 manages in partnership with State Auto Insurance here in town. Been doing that since 2017. I have been working in early stage investments for about 11 years now. And prior to that, I started my career in investment banking in the home building sector. And I think I got asked to participate in this panel here today because I am really lucky enough that a good portion of my job is listening to startup pitches and sitting in on first meetings as companies get first exposure to our State Auto Labs Fund. It is by far my favorite part of the job. I don't think that there is anything better than getting 30 minutes of passionate presentation from an entrepreneur, somebody that is putting his or her entire life into a new business, and we sort of get to be the receivers of that passion and energy. And so it is absolutely one of my favorite parts of the job, managing a fund, and I get to do it very, very often. And so I am lucky and fortunate to be in that position. My fun fact here is that I've officiated 2 weddings, which is a great honor. Both couples are still together, which is, I think, a good thing. And I'm going to be doing my 3rd next year. I just recently got asked to do a 3rd wedding next year. So I got to keep the streak alive. And yeah, that's my fun fact. And I'll turn it over to Andrea to introduce herself and her role at Rev1.
Awesome, thanks. So I'm Andrea Ewing. I'm the manager of corporate connections here at Rev1. I've actually been at Rev1 for 4 years. I just hit my anniversary, so very excited for that. I actually started at Rev1 in the position leading front-end deal flow. So all of the different entrepreneurs that came our way, I got to hear their pitch, hear about their ideas, and provide feedback on that as well. About 2 years into my work, back in 2018, I moved over to the corporate side, where now we work closely with different corporate innovation partners to help them meet their innovation goals. And my role specifically within that is working directly with the entrepreneurs to hear their pitch and help them prepare to actually be put in contact directly with those corporate partners. So, I'm on the same page as Michael. Just, I absolutely love hearing the pitches, working with entrepreneurs, and being able to kind of talk shop with them and figure out how to best tell their story and showcase their abilities to get them to land deals and partnerships. So my fun fact, it's a little bit less positive. I'm a huge OSU fan, and back in 2014, I had the opportunity to go to the Orange Bowl, where OSU unfortunately lost to Clemson. And because of cheap seats and us not having the best season, I got some screen time as the upset fan. So per MKP's request, we have grabbed that to share with you all today. Here I am, devastated. Apparently I was on the screen for a while because I got a lot of texts like, you look really upset there. It's okay, the Bucks are gonna pull through. We didn't, but it was fun and a good 15 minutes. So excited to kind of jump in here today. Hopefully I'll have a better face throughout the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. I hope that you've since recovered from the upset fan screen grab. So why don't we kick it off and just talk about, first of all, how to get a meeting with an investor. We obviously want to talk about how to structure the meeting, how to conduct the meeting, but I think there is some nuance and some strategy involved with how to get an initial meeting in the first place. I think it's not up on the slide here, but I think it's common sense. If you do have a warm lead into a firm, absolutely try to use that, right? If you have, if you know an investor that is connected into that firm, or if you have an entrepreneur that has already gone through pitching to that firm, and there is a direct connection to one of the folks on the team, that is always a really great first angle to take when trying to get a meeting. I know from personal experience, if I get handed a warm lead from somebody in my network, I always try to take that meeting no matter what. Reason being because I want my network to view me as somebody who is always going to be on the receiving end of a lead that they send my way. I want them to always think of me first when they're considering a deal, and I want to always be open to meeting entrepreneurs that they think would be good for me to meet with. So that is a really positive, easy way to network into a firm in the first place. If you don't have, if you don't have necessarily a warm lead into the company, try to just keep it simple. A lot of venture firms have intake forms right on their website. We have one on Rev1 Ventures website. It is massive, huge button that says get started right at the top of the page. Click it. I promise you somebody reads through every single one of those things. And we touch base with 100% of the firms that submit into Rev1 Ventures. I don't think we are alone in that category. Venture firms typically pay close attention to what is coming through their organic deal flow coming through their website. So don't be afraid to click that get started link on your target firm's websites, fill it out. It's likely that you'll get a response at some point. Cold outreach is something that really works, I think. But the caveat is that it really does need to be personal. You have a couple different outlets that you can use for cold outreach. Obviously, LinkedIn is a really good tool. You can use Twitter, I have found, has been a really interesting tool to be able to get introduced to an entrepreneur as well. And sometimes, you can find email addresses of folks that are on the investment team right on a firm's website. And so just do a cold email. You would be surprised how frequently you will get a response to those things. And you can double up. You can use more than one channel to try to get in touch with a firm. Do your research in the beginning, though. Try to call out something that is specific about the fund that you think matches your startup, right? So it could be a prior investment that they've made in a company that is in your category or tangential to your category. It might be stage related if that investor specifically focuses in the concept stage or the seed stage or the Series A stage, and you are within one of those stages. Try to illustrate that to the fund that you're reaching out to, or maybe they have a geographic focus. A lot of funds are, specifically invested or interested in investing in the middle part of America or on the coasts or wherever it is, or right here in Ohio. Try to call that out and try to help them figure out the filter of why should I talk to this company? Why is it important that I see this? And specifically on LinkedIn, you get 300 when you request a connection. You get 300 characters, right, to send a message to that person. You don't have to have LinkedIn Premium. I don't have LinkedIn Premium. You don't have to have LinkedIn Premium to get this, right? You get 300 characters. It is amazing what you can fit in about yourself and your company in 300 characters. And if you send a message that has that sort of warm introduction to yourself and you're calling out a couple of these specific things, the rate at which that message will be read and your connection will be accepted, I think is a lot greater. And I'm giving this advice because I use it all the time myself. When you're starting out a fund, the deals don't just start coming through organically through the top of the funnel. We do a lot of hustling and groundwork to try to get companies into our funnel. And so I am constantly reaching out to leadership teams at companies on LinkedIn, cold. They don't know me. I'm sending them a message trying to tell why their company would be right for my fund. And so this stuff works. I promise you, it can be helpful. Best kept secret, it's a secret. So I think when you are thinking about reaching out to a venture fund, you're looking at kind of the masthead of all the people that are there at the fund, and you kind of have your general partners, you've got your partners, you've got your principals, maybe you have your associates, and you've got your analysts, and you're trying to figure out, all right, who's the best bang for my buck to reach out to. I think very commonly people will be interested in reaching out to a general partner or a partner as part of that fund first. It does make a lot of sense. Typically that person will have a lot of power in terms of decision making for which companies get investments. That is true. If you have a warm intro to a general partner or partner, use it. I would not suggest that you leave or abandon that route. Certainly use it. But I think one of the best kept secrets for entrepreneurs is actually reaching out to the junior person on the team can potentially be the best resource that you have for getting your foot in the door. And the reason that is because if you are on an investment team, you're a junior person, you wake up in mortal fear every single morning that you are going to miss out on a deal. That is the number one thing that you are scared of. It is the number one thing I'm scared of. Andrea, it's probably the number one thing you're scared of. Your number one goal is to make sure that you have a purview of the entire market, of every deal that's getting done. You, at the very least, want to be able to show to your partners that you have seen everything that exists in the market. You might not do every deal, but you want to at least have seen it. So when you reach out to somebody that might be, a little bit lower on the masthead, like an analyst or an associate, your chances typically, in my opinion, are going to be that they will be quicker to reach back out to you and take a meeting. It might take you a little longer to get up to a decision maker at the firm, but it is a great way to get your foot in the door. And the last thing I'll mention about getting a meeting here in Ohio and in the Midwest, we have a network of venture investors called Venture Next. And it is a collaboration of more junior people in their careers that work at venture firms all around the Midwest. We've got a website. You can Google us and find us. I think it's venturenext.com. And if you have a relationship with one of those investors, we hold a monthly deal flow call where we really try to engage with top of funnel across the funds. That could be a really great way to get involved, to meet one of those investors and try to see if they'll bring your company, bring your pitch to that monthly deal flow call. So the last thing I'll mention is when you do sort of reach out or you get a response is it's always good to provide a little bit of yes, venturenext.vc. That does look correct. Thanks for whoever put that in the comments. But one thing you want to remember is to try to provide some information. One pager is a really good thing to try to provide when you are reaching out to an investor. It's always good to provide something. Be wary of providing too much information. It could be overload. If you're given sort of your 30-page pitch deck, your financial model, your go-to-market strategy, that can be a little bit overwhelming. You want to provide something brief, something very short, so that you actually have a shot at the investor reading it before you get to your first meeting. And with that, I will turn it back over to Andrea to talk about the actual call.
Awesome. So one of the big questions that we get a lot is, who should you have on the call? And I think that there's a lot of stress and anxiety surrounding this question as well. But just kind of going back to some of the sentiments that MKP was alluding to of keeping it simple, we are firm believers that 2 team members is plenty. So, if you're the one that's reaching out, definitely great to have a subsequent team member that's prepped and ready to be on the call with you and is an active participant in that conversation. Not only will you then have, some backup support if you get a question that you might not know the answer to, maybe you're flustered trying to find something, trying to, control the screen and do a lot of different things. It's great to have that support on your team. But we also then say, make sure that additional team member is someone who has a complementary expertise. You definitely want to be aware of who's going to be on the call from the investment or, potential partner side. If you have someone that's going to be really technical, pull a technical team member on. If you have someone that's really interested in the financing, pull in whoever's involved in the financing on your team and the capital plan on your team. That way you can kind of set yourself up for success and play into your audience as well. And remember, it's totally fine if you have a question that you need to ask or get answered after. That's always something you can follow up with. But if you can stack the deck in your favor to have all of the knowledge that will be, relevant in the conversation already there, that's going to set you up for success in the best way. Also, with that note, it's always great just to have a second person on those calls, or at least prep for those calls in case you get sick, something happens with your Wi-Fi, it goes out moments before. It's always great to have that kind of backup so that you don't have to cancel on the meeting or reschedule. I know it's hard to get those on the calendar in the first place. So having that preparedness is always really great. Playing into your audience also leads into then knowing who is on the call. It's totally appropriate to ask who they anticipate having in the discussion, and that just sets you up for success. Knowing the people's backgrounds, if you can even figure out things about their personality, if they're very personable people, if they're involved in a lot of different programs or things, being able to play into that, bring up mutual interest or otherwise, just like typical networking, this is a great opportunity to kind of prep for that and use that to your advantage to build that rapport and otherwise. So after you figure out who's going to be on the call, here's how we think that you can kind of set up and run the meeting so that you're most successful. So I don't know about you guys, but every single call now is Zoom or Blue Jeans, some sort of video conference. And it's always starting off with the hi, how are you? Where are you calling in from? Very cordial. It's a lot of now to, can you hear me? Can you see me? You're muted. I know, haha, I had trouble getting into Zoom too. So with that in mind, that is all still totally encouraged. as much rapport as you can build in the beginning of the call is so important. Gaining understanding of, how they're doing in COVID can actually glean a lot of insights into the conversation itself. So definitely encourage kicking off with some warm introductions around the room, giving insight into who you are, learning about who they are in their own words as well, and having that kind of awkward moment of talking about the weather and how Columbus and Ohio is not as great as some parts of California. Surprise, surprise. Secondly, we would highly encourage having your camera on. It doesn't matter if you haven't gotten your hair cut in 6 months, if you are wearing a t-shirt, if you have a dog or kids running around in the background, having your camera on makes such a huge difference. Being able to build that rapport, be able to make fake eye contact, because you're never actually making eye contact through the camera, but you can fake it, will just make a dramatic difference in your ability to connect with that investor, be able to read their cues, they'll be able to read your social cues, and it'll just naturally allow for more engaged discussion, more questions, and it feel a lot more natural that way. Just as we mentioned, you can ask for who's going to be on the call on their behalf. You can also ask if they have a preferred agenda. So, it's always best to make sure that you're answering and providing whoever you're speaking to with all of the information that they're interested in hearing. And so if they're able to provide that, if they have one laid out that they actually send to everyone, I know the MKP, you do this, you basically request exactly what you want to hear. I do this as well. I have a prep call, setting them up for success basically before a broader call with the team to make sure that we're getting everything answered. Take that to your advantage. Make sure that you take those notes, ask for it to either be sent to you, whatever it might be, so that you can make sure when you're prepping for that discussion, you have all of those boxes checked. With that as well, we encourage those meetings to be about 30 minutes. If it can be 30 minutes, keep it at 30 minutes. Time is money. And a wise colleague once told me that if you plan for something, a task to be completed in 30 minutes, it can be completed in 30 minutes. So just really being conscientious of the time, keeping an eye on the clock, and doing your prep work to make sure that you're able to hit all of the high points, your introduction, your problem and your solution, how you're differentiated in the market, and then also, that capital. And we'll walk through this in a little bit more depth on one of our next slides, but making sure that you kind of plot that out in your mind and follow that strategically with your eye on the clock will make sure that you are able to communicate to your best extent what makes you stand apart, what makes your company special. And I know that we've all had those times where we get lost in the story, we get into the weeds, and we can talk for hours, especially about something that we're as passionate about as our babies, our startups. And so definitely a challenge for a lot of people, especially the first few times through, but can be so impactful and so important. Making sure too that when you're keeping an eye on the calendar or on the clock, you're leaving that time for Q&A will also just make you seem very poised, collected, and show a lot of your professionalism through that conversation. And then this last point is actually something that I think is most important in my eyes, other than, of course, being respectful of their time and being courteous to that. Assume that they know nothing about your company. There is a very large chance that you were very well prepared and you sent a one-pager, a pitch deck, maybe even a video about what you do and how you're special. But in all honesty, a lot of these firms, they are being inundated by a ton of different requests, being sent pitch deck after pitch deck. They might be reviewing 10 plus different pitches in a day in preparation for a day of meetings, if they are even able to fit in all of that prep themselves. So it's really important to make sure that you're meeting everyone where they're at, you're getting everyone on an even playing field, and being able to communicate fully what you have to offer, and make sure that everybody walks out of that room with the same understanding of who you are and how you're differentiated and what makes you special and why you should be one to captivate their mind share. Like we were just mentioning, mind share is really hard to come across. It's a very busy time for everyone. It's always a busy time for everyone. So everything that you can do to make sure that they come out of that meeting with the same understanding and everyone can communicate it clearly with one another, that's going to set you up for further success.
Andrea, a quick question for you on, prepping for the meeting.
Yeah.
Go to some meetings and there's sort of a walkthrough of a slide deck. Other entrepreneurs prefer to kind of keep it conversational. Do you have a preference on whether there should be sort of supporting materials through the first conversation, or should it be more conversational? What do you like to see in that?
That is a great question. From my experience, any presentation is helpful. Even if it's 2 slides, it's really great just to be able to kind of point people towards an image of something concrete while you're talking them through this abstract idea. It's easier to lose people in that conversation than thinking about their next meeting, than thinking about something else, if you aren't pairing that with something concrete on the screen. And then paired with that as well, I think it's really powerful to be able to then have that takeaway that they were just walked through, that they understand what the slide means with the context, to be able to share and reflect on thereafter. So for me, I would always encourage having a couple of slides ready to walk through and talk through. Even like I said, even if it's just an image of your logo and 2 lines on a PowerPoint, that will help with just their engagement a little bit better than just an abstract conversation. And I do think too, there's a lot of ways to just spark up the conversation and start it off with those kind of conversational cues in the beginning to make it feel more conversational. And even if you do have that PowerPoint in front of you, to encourage that dialogue throughout. Do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also prefer having some kind of deck or material to walk through. I think there are some people that in just a conversation are able to stay really on point and keep the conversation moving forward. But I've found that oftentimes having a deck, having something to point to, as you mentioned, really helps you stay on an agenda and continue to work through the things that you need to get through during a 30-minute call. So I agree with you. I will just say that you and I are just 2 people that do this. There are probably other folks that enjoy just having a conversation. I think that's kind of one thing that might be a little bit different if you're meeting somebody in person in a non-pandemic time. It might be a little bit easier to go through just a conversational pitch and not have a deck. I think when you're doing things virtually, having a deck is always helpful.
That's a great point too. And one last just thing that I would add is it's also just beneficial for the entrepreneur themselves. A lot of times it helps them stay on track and have a straight kind of thought process, not leave things out along the way. While, if you are just having that conversation, it might be easier to leave something out and try to backtrack to it and not painting as clear of a picture. Sorry, Heather, you had a question?
The only thing I would add to that is that in my experience, tech doesn't always work. So be prepared that your presentation may not work. It may not open, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, come prepared with one, but if it doesn't work, be prepared enough with your pitch that you wouldn't need it.
Definitely.
That's a great point, Heather. I've witnessed that situation. I've both witnessed that situation and been in that situation when tech doesn't work, and it is slightly terrifying. So always helps to be prepared in advance of that happening. All right, so you've done your homework on the investors that you are trying to target. You have either gone through a warm lead and done cold outreach to those investors. They've responded. You have sent over some materials in advance, and it comes time to hold your 30-minute call with the investor. Wanted to just provide a framework of how Andrea and I typically think through how to structure these meetings, right? Because you got 30 minutes and you got a lot that you are trying to cover. So how do you pack everything into that 30-minute time period? I think one of the things that you should be prepared to do at the very start of the meeting is to grab the reins on the introductions. Now, the investor that you're speaking with, they might grab the reins in the very beginning, and that's okay. Let them start with their introductions, but I found oftentimes it is a little awkward to get meetings going, so just take the leadership position and start the meeting yourself if you can. And you might be kicking it off, but I found that it often helps to let the venture investor introduce themselves first and ask them to introduce themselves first so that they can say their piece, and then you will have the rest of the meeting to really talk about yourself, your team, and your business. So first 5 minutes, just let the venture investor introduce themselves, and feel free to ask them some questions about their portfolio. You've already done your homework on them, so you probably have a couple questions for them. It's fair game. It's good to show that you've done your research. Open up the meeting that way. When they're done, we always like it when an entrepreneur introduces himself or herself at the top of the call. I think during the pandemic, right, and when you're pitching virtually, this is one of the things that oftentimes drops out, and it's easy to forget that we're still involving ourselves in a human interaction, right? And so it's important to know the person that you're speaking with. It's important to introduce yourself. Don't just dive straight into your company at 100 miles an hour, because it's really important to make a connection on an individual level. So start with an introduction of yourself, and don't forget kind of that human aspect of pitching. That comes, I think, fairly naturally when you're doing it in person, but not necessarily when you're on screen. And then you get into kind of the meat of your presentation. My personal belief is that the meat of your presentation should really focus on defining a clear problem that you're addressing and really spending most of the time describing your product. There's a million things that you could talk about during this initial 30-minute meeting, right? Because you're pouring your life into this company. You may want to talk about all the, technical prowess on your team and how, painstaking detail around how you have built your software, or, how you are continuing to build the company, or your business model, or your pricing. Those are all going to be extremely important things for your investor to understand at some point. And it may come up in the Q&A, but I think the number one thing you really want to focus on in a first call is conveying what your problem is that you're addressing, and also your product. And the reason is because product is the first thing that somebody is going to gravitate towards, and it's the first thing that they are going to try to understand about your business, because what you hope happens after your first call is the person that you are sharing your business with is going to be hopefully taking really good notes, and they are then going to take those notes if they find your business within their investment envelope, and it's going to be on them to communicate your product and value proposition to the rest of their team. And what they're going to try to do in most cases is communicate it to the rest of the team in hopes that they can bring you back for a second meeting with a larger group of individuals to try to build consensus around your deal and try to build momentum around it. So I think product is super important. I think it's okay to focus the majority of your time on this. And if your investor or the person you're pitching to leaves the meeting and they cannot explain your product, you're likely sunk in the first place. And so just really focus on the product, make them understand what it is that you're building. After you're done on that, if you are raising financing, and I say if because a lot of companies try to build relationships with VCs before the time that they actually have to raise capital. And so you might be talking to an investor and you're not raising right now, but you're planning to raise in 6 months or 9 months, and you're starting to develop your pipeline. That's totally cool. We take meetings like that all the time. But be prepared to comment on what your capital pathway is, because ultimately the investors taking the call, right? Because they're hopeful that this will become an opportunity in their investment pipeline, and they will hopefully get a chance to invest in the company at some point down the line. So make sure you carve out a couple of minutes to talk about what your plans are for financing. And it also helps your investor prioritize. If you're raising right now, this becomes kind of an immediate opportunity that needs to be escalated, after the meeting. If it is something that is a couple months down the line, that lets them know that they have some time to cultivate the relationship, build more momentum around the company. But it's important to talk to, where are you in the process? Do you have a lead investor for the round already? How much are you raising? What is your time frame? These are all important things to address and can typically be done in 5 minutes or so. And then lastly, it's always good to try to carve out some time for Q&A. This takes a couple different routes. Typically, you might have an investor that from the get-go, you're sort of like a minute into your introduction, and it's, how do you price it? What's your business model? And so that's good. That's good. I view that as a really positive sign. If you get somebody on the horn that behaves in that fashion, it means they're interested. Maybe they've done their research, their background already on the company. But sometimes they will sit politely and wait for you to finish your presentation and ask questions at the end. I know I try to act that way and save my questions till the end. And so just make sure you save some time for it, but be prepared for them to pepper you with questions throughout your presentation too, if that's the way that they go about it. And yeah, the last piece I think that is important is you're going to have, you might have your deck available and you're walking through your deck. If you get to a point where the questions are so heavily focused on the product that you think, hey, it might be best for me to just pull up a demo, and if it's something you can walk through very quickly, have that up, on one of your tabs on your browser, and it might just be the best route to pull it up and start walking them through the demo. Nothing better than getting hands and eyes on the product within that meeting. So it's good to have it on deck if it's helpful to reference it and use it. So that's the 30-minute meeting. Andrea, back over to you.
Perfect. So with that layout, there's a lot of content being covered. I know that we talked to about, keeping an eye on that time. Your 30 minutes has dwindled to an end, and we want to talk about how you're going to end that meeting, how you're going to close it out. So, of course, a few minutes prior, as you're closing out Q&A and you have just a minute or two left, we really recommend that you summarize what those next steps are. So, were there use cases that you identified as being interesting that you wanted to dive deeper into? If it was maybe a strategic investor, was there additional materials that you were going to be providing? Were there a couple questions that you didn't know the answers to that you were going to hunt down? These are all different things that you should include in this little summarization, as well as what the expectations are for how you're going to be in communication in the future. So if you're raising right now and you're asking that they review this opportunity immediately and they're going to get back to you, ask what that expectation is. Are you going to be reaching out to me? Can I expect that in 2 weeks? What is that expectation? And clearly define that and make sure that both sides are aligned. It really helps to make sure that everybody is aligned on that, so that you don't feel rude reaching out too early, but you aren't being just kind of left hanging. And it also puts a little bit of a deadline and just a little bit of an expectation on their side as well. They likely have some sort of common practice with that. So it is not out of line at all to ask for that expectation and to get that alignment ironed out. Again, end on time. One caveat I will say with this is if they are pushing you to, answer a couple more questions and they're saying, we do have availability to continue on for a few extra minutes, and you do as well on your side, it is okay to go a few minutes over 30 minutes or over the designated allotted time. But we really do just try to drive that home, because everyone is running from meeting to meeting, and being cognizant and respectful of that just reflects really well on your team's preparedness and ability to, be concise, and just your professionalism overall. After a meeting like this, I always recommend responding right away to thank everyone for their time, resend the deck if you'd like, or send any additional materials that they had requested that you had discussed. It's a really great way just to, again, showcase your professionalism, your preparedness, and your ability to have really healthy and open communication as well to get that ball rolling. It also then, as a note, just pings all of those people so they all have your direct email address, which is great. So if they have direct questions, they can reach out. It just opens up that ability to have that open communication, and also for them to be able to reflect on the opportunity and circulate it with any of their colleagues that they might think would be interested in the opportunity as well, in a much simpler way. And then also reach back out. Similarly to the idea of trying to capture as much mind share as possible of them as that you can, based on how many different opportunities they're assessing at any time. They might have 20, 30, even 100 companies that they need to follow up with at any given point in time. So you just being cognizant of what that mutually agreed upon time frame looked like, and reaching out at that 2 week, 3 week point to see if there's any feedback, see if there's anything else that they need, any lingering questions or otherwise, is always a benefit. Just in case they got lost in the mix, if they are still lingering on a question and they hadn't gotten around to reaching out, then you're opportunistically back at the top of their inbox. So always highly encourage that. It does just help to also show them that you're excited about the opportunity. We'll just know it's not helpful if you're reaching out prior to that agreed upon time frame. Sometimes that can be overwhelming or off-putting to an investor or an entity. So just be cognizant and respectful of that as well. And after that time frame has surpassed, then it's totally appropriate to go ahead and reach out and ping them. But yeah, just definitely something to be cognizant of. So finally, we wanted to talk about the elephant in the room. What has changed since the pandemic hit, since COVID came in with a vengeance? So, a lot of these early conversations in our experience have been held virtually. You often are reaching out to investors across the country, across the globe. So in a lot of regards, the virtual aspect of hosting these conversations has stayed pretty consistent as they had previous to the pandemic. However, there are a lot of different changes that have come about as well. For instance, never thought I'd be, hosting a community Q&A from my home office. Didn't really process that before, but here we are. So, that's definitely a component, being flexible with yourself and with others, and knowing that, you might have some internet issues, you might have not a beautiful background, you might not have a perfectly quiet meeting, you might have some interruptions along the way. That's going to happen, and that's just something to be prepared of, be aware of, and be okay with. There is also the component of just knowing what technology works best. And if you have one that is your tried and true, being able to encourage that, say, I'll send the meeting invite and the technology that works for me. That's always something that we would encourage as well, if that's best. Again, use your video. Even if you do have chaos going on in the background, or you really need to, declutter your closet, have your video on. It does add so much to the conversation and makes it so much more genuine and natural. Again, like back to what MKP was talking about earlier, it's people connecting with people at the end of the day. People invest in people. So you want to make sure that you have that personal connection and that they leave the meeting having a fair idea of who you are, they have a face to the name, so on and so forth. Some things to be aware of that we have identified as some consistent, more so shifts from the pandemic or impacts. Investors' interests may have changed, so definitely be aware of that. Have they been publishing anything? Have they shifted, what their portfolio looks like in the previous months? We've seen, for instance, some investors who had healthcare maybe as a component of their different interests, to that being their core interest for their current work. So definitely be aware of that as much as possible. And that's also a question that you can ask along the way. Has the pandemic shifted any of your goals or initiatives? Definitely it's something that I think we're all open to discussing and being just cognizant of at this time. With that in mind too, as investors, priorities may have changed. How have your priorities changed? How has your budget specifically changed? So if you are looking for financing right now, how has that impacted some of the different things like your travel budget, your office space and office cost, like supplies needs? What about meals and entertainment, so on and so forth? So, a lot of the investors are going to be looking closely at that to see where you could cut things, where those use of funds would be going. So just definitely make sure that you're on top of that as well, and have taken a close look at how it might have impacted your own needs. And then finally, we all are, scheduling so many virtual meetings, and it's definitely added a layer of challenge to managing our calendars and things. So try to make it as simple as possible. We recommend using a third-party software like Calendly that can provide access to both sides of the table's availability. It helps you land on that availability faster, and then automatically sends out that calendar invite. So if you can eliminate 2 or 3 back and forth emails, getting connected into another team member to help with the coordination or otherwise, it will save you a load of headaches. I know too that one of the challenges of just getting a meeting in the first place is finding that availability. So, for during and post pandemic, this is definitely one of those recommendations that can hold tried and true to make sure that you're not missing out on the opportunity just by scheduling challenges. MKP, anything that you would add that you feel has really been shifted or that I left out for things that have changed?
No, this is a great overview, Andrea, and I think we should move into Q&A here pretty soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're ready. So
yes, we are.
Perfect. Wow, great timing.
Perfect timing, guys. You must have timed this ahead of time, just like you recommended. So we do have quite a few questions, which I'm really excited about. And anyone that does have questions, please put them into the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen, or you can chat them to me as well. So Andrew asks, regarding one-pagers for your cold outreach, is there a best practice or a template that you recommend? What should be included in those one-pagers? Michael, I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. Sure, yeah. Yes, there is best practice and template. I believe that we have a resource for entrepreneurs at Rev1 for this as well on how to put together a one-pager. We also, I believe, have some one-pagers of our portfolio companies at Rev1 as well that you can access through our website. So take a look at those. The answer is yes. There are a couple categories you want to make sure you hit in your one-pager. You want to talk about your team. You want to talk about your product, your business model, any traction that you have, and really focus on those pieces. Just again, keep it brief. It should be something that can be tagged onto an email that can be sent anywhere. And very important, don't put any confidential information or things that you want to keep confidential in your one pager. When you send it out, you want the investor to be able to shoot that around to various members of their team, and not have to worry about your inner secrets of the company, intellectual property being shared. So that would be one tip for the one pager.
Yes, excellent point. And remember, this is just to whet their appetite. You don't have to put everything in it. A one pager really does mean one page.
Yeah. One other just note is I would definitely encourage you just having some sort of way to contact your company, whether it be a designated email or your personal email. If that does get passed on or shared with another investor, it's great just to be able to make sure they have a way to contact you.
All right, Andrea, the next question is for you. So this presentation and the process that you went through, is this only for angel and seed investors, or can this kind of process be used for raising for any series round?
That's a great question. So outside of, I'll let MKP maybe speak to the later stage funding utilization, how that might shift what your deck looks like. But for the question of just utilization in general and can this structure be used in different settings, it absolutely can. A lot of the work that we do actually is not tied to an investment fund specifically, but it's tied more so to strategic initiatives and trying to find different technologies that can, fit into different use cases and needs that a corporation is facing today. And so we actually follow the same structure and we utilize all of the same tips. It's really just driving home being able to clearly communicate your problem and concept, how you're differentiated, and where you are today in your business, so that everyone can walk out of a meeting with a clear understanding and be able to talk about it amongst yourself and share it with a team member clearly. So what MKP mentioned earlier about if you walk out of a meeting and you aren't able to clearly define or share what the company does, you kind of failed in that presentation. So definitely recommend following this kind of regiment and structure in all the different presentations and even early sales meetings that you might have with a partner. MKP, could you speak to a little bit of that later stage kind of communication and how that might shift?
I can, but I agree with you 100%. I don't think it matters. We're talking about tactics to get a first meeting, I think, remain exactly the same, and the stuff that you want to focus on in that initial presentation, again, you're trying to advance to a second call, a second meeting. It's all the same stuff, I think, regardless of what stage you're in. You might have some more traction to talk about the later stage you are that you can bring up in the phone call, but really, again, you want to focus on communicating the product, like you said, Andrea.
Great. Okay, so Michael, I'm going to let you be the first one to answer the next question from Mark. Says he wants to make sure that the market size, your TAM, SAM, SUM are included in that presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that you can oftentimes include that TAM, SAM, SUM as part of your problem statement as you're working into what your product is. Obviously, the hard part is there's a million things that are important to communicate to an investor, right? And in 30 minutes, you got to really prioritize. Market, I think, is really important. Investors obviously want to invest in large markets. If you can work that into your problem statement and explain why this is such a huge problem, then absolutely try to work it in.
Yes, for example, 8 billion people can't wear contact lenses because of presbyopia. We're solving that with XYZ. All right, great. So one question from Cheryl, and I will answer this one. Can I send out the copy of the presentation? Yes, I'll send that out afterwards, Cheryl, so you can share with your team. And I'll send that to everyone that has registered. Now, Fadi asks, how big of a problem is the type of entity raising funding? For example, LLC, Delaware Corp, whatever, C Corp, to a VC in scheduling the initial meeting? Andrea, can you answer that since you take so many first calls?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for initially for the first call, depending on the stage of the company, it isn't always a huge concern. There are definitely some constraints, and it depends on also the stage of the company. So, if you're in the earliest stages of investing, that might be something that you're discussing based on the future funding needs of the company, and kind of dialing into that at that point. I doubt that it would restrict an initial conversation if it is an earlier stage investment, but I will say that for the larger stage investments, that definitely is a component of concern, and can definitely be something that needs addressed before an investment is made. MKP, I'd love your feedback on that one.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I've never responded to a cold outreach with the question, how's your company structured? So I don't think it's necessarily important to kind of get a first meeting, but structure does become important as you move into investment consideration. My advice would be to always work with an attorney that is well-versed in early stage financing. If you haven't worked with anyone yet, we have a network of attorneys at Rev1 that we are happy to put you in touch with. The last thing I'll say is that at the early stages, Rev1, we invest in both LLCs and C Corps. But as you move along, typically what you will find in venture is that most businesses, if they don't start off as C Corps, will transition into C Corps. A lot of times we have to convert our early stage investments into C Corps as they move along the capital continuum into later stages. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but my recommendation is to make sure you're working with an attorney that is well-versed in early stage financing, and they'll be able to walk you through all of this.
Great. Thank you both for that. And the last question we have is from Tammy. Are investors savvy enough to understand the vision that you may have when you're describing your business? I think this is a fun question. Because I think a lot of the pieces that you spoke about in your presentation really get to it is not on the investor to understand, it's on you to explain. But Andrea, I'm gonna let you take this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really great question. And I think that a lot of investors will have enough reps, especially if it's industry specific, of where you could take a concept down the road. But it's your vision, and so you being able to communicate to that to them is really important, so that there's alignment in the overall vision as well. And a lot of times where you're starting and where you want to go might not be super obvious. So if you think through, maybe you have a software that's mainly focusing on data management to start, but you want to build it into a multi-level platform. You think about how Amazon started with a bookstore, look at where it is today. So I think it's really important to be able to paint that picture. And that can be done through the financial portion. If you're talking about how you want to use your funds, you can talk about your capital continuum and look down the road to say, here's when we're thinking about rolling out these other larger components and shifting these things to eventually meet our end goal. That also shows that you're cognizant of you got to start somewhere. You can't boil the ocean. But yeah, definitely being aware and being able to communicate that, even if it's at a high level, 500 feet, I think is in your best interest.
Great. Well, thank you both, and thank you for your time today. And we appreciate everyone that was able to join the call. If you are interested in pitching to Rev1, head over to rev1ventures.com and click on our Get Started button, and you'll be hearing from our team. With that, I want to say thank you to Andrea and Michael for your time today, and everyone for joining. Again, you will get a copy of this presentation as well as a recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.